for us as human beings in this world is we navigate through the difficulties of life to find ourselves in places that we don't understand, in situations that we don't understand, in circumstances that we don't understand. And we do have the opportunity to respond in a million different ways. I would even say almost infinite number of ways that we can respond. And Joseph, the truth is that, yeah, he's just been faithful. Like he's just been obedient. And so you read a story of what's happening in his life, and there's a portion of it that, yeah, those questions seem legitimate, right? God, is this still true? Like, are you still going to come through on all of this, right? Because for Joseph in this moment in Genesis chapter 40 is he's still locked up, right? He's still in prison. Nothing has changed. He is a long way from home, and his father and his family, and vindication and hope, even at some levels, all of that stuff is so far away from Genesis 37, where God gave him these incredible dreams about what was going to happen. And so we come to Genesis 40, and the favored son is still in prison. He's still a righteous man who has been falsely accused. And so, Genesis chapter 40, as we read through it, the thing that I want you to remember most about this is that there are chapters in Scripture, and this is one of them, where there is quiet, providential groundwork that God is doing. And from our human perspective, looking at things from a purely human plane of existence, the groundwork that God is doing doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Because in our minds, we want to apply the filter of our understanding of goodness to the goodness of God, our understanding of grace to the grace of God and the mercy of God. You see what I'm saying? We want to apply our mind's filter to something that far literally blows all of that out of the water when it comes to God. And the truth is, whether you like to hear this or not, and I don't like to hear it either, so that's why I say that, is that what we're going to see tonight is that God is at work in the waiting. When he says, hold on, when the darkness of the moment is overwhelming, he's still there. God can even use a prison cell to position his servant to the most interesting of places. And what we're going to see tonight is that even God uses the dreams of pagan officials, non-believing officials, for his purpose. And he's doing all of this in such a way that Joseph is having to learn to trust him when nothing seems to be changing. Right? And that's where things get hard. That's where things get dicey, right? Because we don't like that. Like, it's not fun. It's not, at some level, it's not comforting, right? To be in that place. But we can't deny the reality of what God is doing and how God operates even in those most interesting places. So I want to read to you a few verses and we're going to talk about it. Let's look at 1 through 4 first. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against the Lord of the king of their Lord of the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. And they continued for some time in custody. So, here's how this opens up. Sometime after this, right? So, why is that here? We know that Joseph has already been in prison, and some time has passed, right? So, this is not a short stay. We don't know how much time. It could have been days, weeks, longer. We just don't exactly know at this point. But what we do know is from this perspective that Joseph's suffering was not temporary, right? It wasn't like, oh, you're going to spend 24 hours in jail and then it's just all of a sudden it's going to get better. No, this is a period of time. And then all of a sudden, we have this picture of like, okay, and while Joseph is there, these two very important people in the realm of Pharaoh get thrown into prison, the cupbearer and the chief baker. These aren't ordinary guys, by the way, because the cupbearer literally held one of the most trusted positions in the kingdom, right? Because whenever Pharaoh was brought a drink, the cupbearer would come and take a drink of it first to make sure that it wasn't poison, right? Same thing with eating. Everything that Pharaoh ate, this guy took a bite first. And so he's like the trusted guy. And the baker is the guy who's overseeing, right, the important thing, right? The food. He's cooking. So again, very important trusted positions. And something's happened. We don't even know what it is. But it says that there's some crime that's been committed against Pharaoh. And I think that's intentional, why we don't know. But Pharaoh is mad at them. That's the thing about it. And he puts them in jail in the house of the captain of the guard where Joseph is at. And again, not accidental detail. God is telling us the story, right? Same prison, same location, same suffering servant is already there. And so this is God's quiet providence at work that I was talking about. Because Joseph is not just anywhere in Egypt. He's at the exact prison where he's going to meet the men of Pharaoh's inner circle. And that's where we start to see that this confinement isn't actually confinement, it's placement. Right? That God has orchestrated, God has put him there for a very specific reason. And so what looks like a setback is actually divine positioning in the economy of God. Verse 4 says, the captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them. He attended them, right? So, just like we saw, when Joseph gets to Egypt, as he's in jail, he's given more responsibility. So he's entrusted with that. And that matters, right? Because that means that even though Joseph has been in prison for some duration, some period of time, his character hasn't changed, right? He's still trusted. He's still faithful. He's still useful. He's still the kind of man that people in authority look at and they're like, we can trust this guy, right? And so he's not just suffering and allowed to suffer and rot in prison, right? And his affliction, I'm going to call it that, has not made him bitter or useless. It has made him, if anything, more steady and trustworthy. And it says here, the Bible says he attended them. That means he serves them, he cares for them, he gives oversight to them. So basically, Joseph becomes a servant again, right? Like he was in Potiphar's house, like now he is in prison. And the lesson here is this, that faithfulness to God is not dependent on ideal circumstances, right? The call of God doesn't change on your life because your circumstances change. Right? God has called us to make disciples of all nations. It doesn't matter what the doctors tell you or what diagnosis you may get or where things may go sideways. That mission doesn't change. God doesn't say, well, now that this is going on, that changes things. No, God says, listen, maybe I'm just putting you in the right place at the right time because there may be a doctor that's going to oversee your care that needs to know the Lord. Right? It's a different perspective. It's not an easy one. Right? But it's a perspective and a healthy one. Listen to what happens next. And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled, and so he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in the master's house, why are your faces downcast today? And they said to him, we have had dreams, and there's no one to interpret them. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. Right? So, God becomes a little more visible in the narrative, right? He's moving. He's given these men dreams. Same night, different dreams, and each one of them carries a different meaning, right? And that's not just like some random thing of like subconscious imagery or anything like that. What's happening here is divinely ordered dreams. God is giving specific dreams because the interpretations are going to be important, right, to what's happening. And so each one of them have their own interpretation. And Joseph comes along in the morning and is like, man, what's going on with these guys? They look a little sad today. And so he asks them, right, what's going on? He's attentive to their needs, just like is expected of him. And he's not so consumed with everything going on in his own life that he neglects his responsibilities, right? That's important because he's still in prison. And he asks them, why are you downcast? And then they say, we've had these dreams and there's no one to interpret them. They're in crisis. In the ancient world, if you had dreams, those were significant things, right? So if you had dreams, it was really important, and reliable interpretation was extra important because you wanted to know what your dream meant, right? And so Joseph comes back to them and he says, hey, don't interpretations belong to God? Joseph says, God's the one who gives dreams. So don't the interpretations belong to him? And he says, I know a guy, right? So he says, please tell them to me. And Joseph, it's kind of an important theological statement that Joseph is making here, because he doesn't say I have a gift or I know how to handle this. He's not presenting himself as some like mystical expert or anything like that. He is going to immediately take the matter to God, right? He knows God. He has a relationship with God. So he's like, these interpretations belong to God, so I'm just going to go to the man himself. And from a place of humility, that's kind of the position he's going to take. That's what he's going to do. He's magnifying God, right? The future is in God's hands. The meaning belongs to him. Understanding comes from him. Tell me the dreams, and we're going to find out what God has to say about them. And so the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. And as soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here I have also done nothing wrong that they should put me in the pit. So, cupbearer's up first, right? 3 branches, buds, blossoms, grapes, Pharaoh's cup in his hand, pressing the grapes, all that's happening. And Joseph he has this interpretation immediately. He's like, in 3 days, right? This 3 branches, 3 days. This is what's going to happen, right? So it's like, this isn't like some vague interpretation. It's like very, very specific that he's giving him these details. He says, Pharaoh's going to lift your head and restore you to the office. So, basically, what Joseph is saying to this man is that there is going to come an exaltation in the form of restoration in your life. So this situation you're in is only a 3-day stay here, which I'm not sure how easy that was for Joseph to interpret, considering that he had been there for some duration and he has no idea when he's going to get out. But the picture here is that the cupbearer is going to be brought out of the shame and back into the service. So whatever crime he committed, it's going to get worked out somehow, and 3 days is going to be his restitution. And the interesting thing is Joseph doesn't just interpret the time frame, right? He interprets the outcome too, that Pharaoh's going to restore him. And he literally says, the very place that you stood, the thing that you did before, that's what you're going to go back to, right? You're going to be right back in that place. And by the way, this is not Pharaoh's doing, and this is not this man's doing. This is all things that God is doing. God is the one working through this. God is the one working behind the scenes over the dreams, the offices, over the outcomes, even over the restoration. This is what God is doing. How do we know that? Because there is not a single king or ruler that has ever ruled apart from the allowance of God, right? Even the bad ones, right? And people are like, well, how can God do that if he's good? Well, because God brings judgment on unrighteous nations. And he does it in the form of bad leadership. So in this country, every time we've had a bad leader, I guess that's open to interpretation, but every time we've had a bad leader, generally speaking, we get what we deserve, right? Because we are usually going the wrong way and making very poor decisions morally and ethically and religiously, and God brings judgment in that way. It's always been the case. That's the way God does things, right? Court positions don't exist apart from God. The rise and fall of servants, all in God's hands. These are all things that God's looking out for. And Joseph says, he gives them this interpretation, and then Joseph gets a little emotional and human for a second. And he's like, here's the only thing I ask you, remember me. Right? When you get back to the place that you're going, remember me when it's well with you. So don't push this issue immediately, but give it a little bit of time to settle back in and do me some kindness and mention me to Pharaoh. Right? Joseph has been strong. He stood firm. He's been God-centered. He's been wise. He's been faithful. But he's also tired. Right? He had these really cool dreams, and then things kind of went sideways. And it's not been an easy road since those dreams happened. And so he's like, man, just at the right time, just remember me. Ask for kindness for me from Pharaoh. And I mean, the truth is, I understand it. Like, I get it. I wouldn't want to be in prison either, right? And so it's a fair thing. But then he explains it, right? For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. And here also I've done nothing that they should put me in the pit. He says, listen, the issue is that, like, it's not just that I'm not guilty. It's like I was brought here against my will, and I'm not guilty, and I've been wrongfully imprisoned. And he's not lying, right? All of those things are true. He's not even exaggerating. In fact, I think he's dumbing it. I think he's understating exactly what happened. But he's speaking the truth about his suffering. And all he's asking is for this guy who's going to get back to the place where he wants to be, is to remember him. And this is by the way, not a faith issue. This is not Joseph's faith wavering or anything like that. It's just Joseph in his humanity appealing to mercy by ordinary means, right? I say it, common grace, right? He's looking for common grace, this shared humanity that they have. He's like, hey man, look out, I'm looking out for you by interpreting this dream and easing the weight off of your shoulders a little bit, so look out for me. And, well, we'll see in a minute, but even when human help fails, God's providence doesn't. That's a preview. In case you don't know, the cupbearer doesn't remember him. Spoiler alert. And so Joseph is being painted not as this like religious stoic machine who has no emotion, who has no longing or anything like that. No, he's being shown exactly for who he is, that he feels, that he understands the injustice that's been done to him, that he longs for freedom, and that he's hoping for deliverance. And none of those things are bad things, right? In fact, I would say they're good things. Now, here's where things get a little more interesting. The chief baker comes along, saw that the interpretation was favorable, so he's like, man, that sounds good. I want to get out of jail too. And he said to Joseph, I had a dream too. There are 3 cake baskets on my head. And the utmost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Okay. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang it on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. So, this guy hears about the cupbearer and is like, yep, I want to hear my interpretation. And he's like, there's cake baskets and baked goods and birds eating out of the basket, and I'm standing before Pharaoh. And Joseph's like, yep, 3 days, 3 baskets. But I hate to tell you, bro, not like the cupbearer. In 3 days, Pharaoh is going to lift your head from you, right? In case you aren't picking up what Joseph is putting down, Pharaoh is going to cut this man's head off and hang it on a tree, and the birds are going to eat the flesh. So, That's a contrast, if I've ever heard one, right? And in how these dreams are going. But same time frame, right? 3 days, same time frame, different structure. One's going to be restored, one's going to be removed, right? And so Joseph comes into this situation. He speaks the truth, right? Very truthful. That's important because Joseph doesn't soften the interpretation of the second one. He's just honest with him. He's like, listen, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but this is what this means, right? He doesn't try to distort the interpretation and make it more acceptable or comfortable. He doesn't just tell some of what's going to happen and not the rest of it. Like, yeah, in 3 baskets is 3 days, and in 3 days Pharaoh's going to lift your head from you. And it's going to be fine, right? No, it's like, no, this is bad, right? But the picture that, again, not necessarily of the dreams and what's happening there, but the picture here is of Joseph, right? That he is a man who possesses this sort of spiritual integrity. He is a servant of God who doesn't control the message. He's not looking for approval. He's just speaking what God has told him to speak, whether it's comfortable or it confronts. And there is some profound theological truth that exists in these dreams and the interpretations, and that is this, in case you don't know this, God is sovereign over life and death. And I know this is hard because people die young and we say it's too soon. People die old and we say, man, they had many, many years to enjoy on this earth. But the truth of the matter is that every single one of our days has been numbered by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And we don't know what that is, but we trust His goodness, whether He takes us after 4 years or 40 years or 400 years. We trust in His goodness because the power of life and death belong to only one. It is one of the chief and sole responsibilities of God and God alone. And the same God who will lift one up and restore is going to be the same God who will bring another down. And it's not easy truth, but it is biblical truth. And sometimes revelation, God's word even, it's not always comforting. Sometimes God does reveal judgment, and it's very hard to hear, and it's very hard to read. And sometimes the future that He unveils is not one where we make it out unscathed, but it's one where a reckoning happens. And I think this is what makes Genesis 40 so heavy, is that God in this chapter is not just informative, meaning that God isn't just telling us stuff. He's sovereign, He's discerning, and He's just, and He's acting accordingly. And for us as human beings looking at that, that's where things can get uncomfortable. Again, because we try to put our lens of our understanding of the attributes of God onto the actual attributes of God. It's like, no, we don't understand what it means to be perfect in anger, perfect in judgment, and in wrath, and in mercy. We don't understand what that means. Because we don't know anybody who's like that. I've never met anybody who is perfect in wrath. I've met a lot of angry people, right? But they aren't even perfect in that, right? And listen to what happens next. On the third day, 3 days, 3 cakes, all that, which was Pharaoh's birthday. He made a feast for all of his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted them. And there it is, right? So, Joseph interprets the dreams, and then unironically, the 3 days after these dreams, Pharaoh's birthday, huge celebration where everyone's going to be around, and he gives a feast, and he's setting up the restoration and judgment, and I don't know if apparently these guys didn't do the same thing, because the cupbearer obviously gets out a little bit easier on this. He spent 3 days in jail and he lives, and then the baker does not, right? And so, but the outcomes match exactly what Joseph said, right? There is not one thing that happens that Joseph didn't talk about. The cupbearer is restored, the chief baker is hanged. That's pretty much how it happens, right? And just like Joseph said, just like God revealed to him, and that fulfillment of that matters, right? Because in case you don't know this, all these yahoos out here on TV, on YouTube and TBN, all that, who are getting these prophecies from God, and then it doesn't come true, and they're like, oh, my bad, it's this. It's not, Jesus isn't coming back in 2020 or 2000 when the clocks change and no one knows what's going to happen at Y2K. Jesus is coming back in 2022, and then Jesus doesn't come back. He's like, my bad, I misread the numbers. Like, no, bro, you're a false prophet. Here's the thing. In the economy of God, prophets, as they call themselves, got one shot. You get one shot. You miss that shot, you get dead because you're a false prophet. That's the way it works in the economy of God. In the nation of Israel, if you turned out to be a false prophet, they just killed you, because that means you're untrustworthy, and God certainly isn't working in you, right? And so Joseph here is not guessing, right? He is receiving divine interpretations from God. They come true exactly, and that in and of itself is glorious, because God is moving, right? In this place of obscurity, right? In jail, God is governing this prison, and He's governing the palace, right? Pharaoh doesn't just do this. Pharaoh is doing this, and he doesn't even know, he probably doesn't even know why he's doing it. He probably thinks that he's doing this grand gesture, but at the end of the day, Pharaoh only looks all-powerful. The truth of the matter is Pharaoh is unwittingly carrying out what God had already declared through Joseph's interpretation. So Pharaoh's like, I'm doing this cool thing. I'm restoring my cupbearer. I'm hanging, killing the baker. Look what I did. And Joseph is sitting there, and he's like, yeah, 3 days ago, I already told them exactly what was going to happen. So if you really think you're doing this, you're sadly mistaken, my friend. And that theme, actually, this theme of rulers of earth never being autonomous is like a theme that runs through Scripture a lot, actually, when you look at it. God uses pagan nations to judge the nation of Israel, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, right? God uses them. God uses the nation of Israel to bring judgment on other nations too, right? And so this fulfillment, everything that's happening here, it is preparing us for what comes next. If Joseph's words prove true, then we're meant to trust him when Pharaoh is going to dream later, because that's going to happen. So this chapter, what it's doing is this sort of quiet providential work of God that he's doing is actually showing us a picture that Joseph is a man of God, that he is in tune with what God is doing, that God is speaking to him, that he is a man of credibility and anticipation. And it starts with his own dreams, then it moves to these two men's dreams, and eventually it's going to move to Pharaoh's dreams. And his prophetic reliability is kind of being publicly established, because there are people in prison who are hearing, they heard what happened. It wasn't like it was a private matter, right? And so, again, the precision of divine providence. 3 days meant 3 days, right? It was what it was. The outcome's exact, the future unfolding just as God had determined it. And I wrote this, and I'm just going to say it. There's nothing uncertain in God's knowledge. So when we hear things we don't understand, God knows. God understands. When we want to ask God questions why, we can ask God questions why. Because He can handle it. Because He knows why. He may not always tell us the answer, but He knows. And then this. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. That's the final verse. And it lands like a hammer on a glass table. It is short, it is simple, and it is heartbreaking. The man that Joseph served, the man that Joseph comforted, the man that Joseph interpreted for, the man that Joseph only asked that he be remembered, forgets him. And Joseph speaks this truth into darkness. And when the light comes back on for the cupbearer, Joseph just gets left in the dark. And honestly, this may be, to me, the most painful verse in Joseph's story. Even in light of all the stuff his brothers did, this one is just, it just feels worse, because from a human standpoint, it looks like this was obviously his way out. Right? He did everything right. And all he asked for this guy was to put in a good word for Pharaoh. It looks like this is the way out, right? There was this connection that happened. There was this opportunity. There was actually this means for deliverance that was right in front of him, and then nothing. He's forgotten. No mention of Pharaoh, no release, no gratitude from the cupbearer, just silence. Imagine this. You do what's right. You help somebody, you serve faithfully, you trust that maybe this is the moment God is going to change things, and then the door slams closed. Person forgets, circumstances don't change, the prison stays shut. And that's where Genesis 40 ends. The question is why? Because this chapter wants us to feel the ache of delay. It wants us to understand that God's providence includes seasons where the servant of God looks forgotten. But I remind you that Joseph is forgotten by the cupbearer, not by God. That's the difference, right? Just because it feels like you're forgotten, just because it feels like no one is noticing your pain, or no one is noticing exactly what you're going through, it doesn't mean that you're forgotten. That's not a reason to run away from God. It's all the more reason to run to God, because God does know. And I think that's the unspoken glory in the final verse. The forgetting of man doesn't mean the forgetting of God. In fact, the delay that God is using here in Genesis chapter 40 it's not even really a delay. It's just God's timing. And if Joseph had remembered, or if Joseph had been remembered immediately, right, the story would unfold very differently. I have no idea how it would unfold, but it wouldn't unfold like what we're going to read. God isn't planning Joseph's release. He's planning Joseph's rise at the appointed time, in the appointed way, and for the appointed purpose. Joseph is going to serve a great, great role in the survival of not only the nation of Egypt, but the nation of Israel and other nations. But in order to get where God was going to put him, there was a whole lot of Joseph's life that looked like everybody, including God, had forgotten him, if you just read it on paper at face value. But of course, we don't read it that way, right? We read it for what it is, that it's a part of this grander story that God is telling. And so, the final verse is painful, but it's not hopeless. That's the thing. It's painful, but it is not hopeless. So the silence of the cupbearer is making room for the timing of God. That's really what's happening. So Genesis chapter 40 is about waiting. It's about truth. It's about what feels like forgetfulness. But at the heart of all of it is a healthy reminder to us that in it all and through it all, God is the one who's ultimately working. That, yes, this is Joseph's story, but Joseph's story is just one part of God's grander story. Just like Eric's story is only one part of God's grander story. God is speaking. He's governing. He's preparing. He's positioning. He's not done. But that doesn't mean it feels good. It doesn't mean it's easy. Right? It doesn't mean we don't have questions. Right? It doesn't mean that we put on a super spiritual mask and we say, well, you know, and I believe God is absolutely sovereign, by the way, if you haven't gathered that based on everything I've ever taught since I've been here. I believe God is absolutely sovereign. But if you think for a second that I don't sit alone in my own life and be like, God, no clue what you're doing, don't even know if you got a handle on this right now, bro. I don't know how I'm feeling because I'm a mess and everything feels like a mess and I don't know what you're doing and help. And it's like, but at the end of the day, like, eventually I come around and be like, but God, you're sovereign, right? I come around to that eventually, like after I get over everything else, right? It's like, God, what are you doing? Like, in case you don't know, like for me, this is a point I'm at right now in my life, right? Been going to the doctor a lot, like having another appointment on Friday, like been seeing all kind of different doctors, like just working things out, right? And it's like, God, okay, like I don't really know what's happening. Don't really know what you're doing. Don't know why I hurt my foot doing just a normal everyday thing. But here's what I do know, God. I don't like it. Like right now in this moment, I don't like it. Now I know you're doing something great, and I know I'm going to look back and see the light and see really what you were doing the whole time. But right now, God, it feels a lot like I'm in the dark in the prison with Joseph, except Joseph had a lot more figured out when he was in his 20s than I have figured out in my 40s, right? And so it's like, God, I don't know. I don't know. I trust you, but I have doubt. Like, I have doubt. There are things that hit, and I don't know. But the thing about it is, what brings the ship back in line, what gets us re-anchored is the reality that our questions and our doubts and the things that we struggle with, Joseph, when he's asking these very human questions, it doesn't change anything about the character of God, and it doesn't change anything about God's perspective of us either. God knows what we don't know. And God isn't looking at us saying, man, if you just trusted me a little bit more. God is looking at us as a compassionate Father and saying, I know that you don't understand right now, but I love you anyway, and one day you will. Things that my mom has said to me, right? I know that you don't understand this now, but one day you're going to understand. It's all going to make sense. And I hated when she said that, right? Just like it's tough when God says that too. But we recognize the seasons. We recognize those moments for what they are. And you know what we do? We just keep moving forward. Right? We just keep doing what God has told us to do. Joseph doesn't stop. He doesn't say, well, God, I guess I'm not getting out this time, so I guess I'll just lay down and die in prison. No, he just keeps doing what God has asked him to do. He keeps being obedient. He keeps being faithful. Now, again, this is where this 20-year-old's got a lot more wisdom than I have, because for me, I want to wallow, right? I want to wallow. Be like, no, woe is me, boo-hoo, right? Like, God, I just want to walk right. I want to run again. Like, I want to be like Forrest Gump and just keep running, right? So if you could just make this thing better, like, and, you know, and it's like, but it just, we trust. We just have to trust. No matter what, we have to trust. In life and death, we have to trust. In sickness and in health, we have to trust. In moments of abundance and in moments of poverty, we have to trust. We just have to trust that God's goodness is exactly what He says it is. And if we do that, then we can be very much in the same boat as Joseph and just keep pressing on. We can run the race, like Paul says, run the race. I stayed in the fight, I won the race, right? Any questions tonight?